Okay, so I'm going to talk through a paired t-test in SPSS. So the point of a paired t-test is to compare two conditions completed by the same person. So in my example here, I'm going to do a physiology example. We've measured oxygen consumption in litres per minute at the lactate threshold, and we've also measured the oxygen consumption at the ventilatory threshold. And what we're wanting to know is there a difference in that oxygen consumption between the two thresholds? So to be able to do that, we're going to do a paired t-test. Something to note in SPSS is that for each line or each row, it's the same person's data. So because this is a paired t-test and it's the same people doing the lactate threshold as the ventilatory threshold, you can see that there's two data points for that row. So making sure that's something to note when it comes to using SPSS. The first thing that I would do is draw a graph. And I've done this in Excel because this is how I prefer to do it. So you can see the graph here, and you can see that I've plotted the means and the standard deviations as the error bars to see if there's a difference in the data. So visually you can see there's not much going on in that data. So when I'm doing my SPSS output, my assumption is that there's not going to be any difference, and I think it's quite vital to have a bit of an idea as to what you might see in your data. So if we go back to SPSS, the first thing we need to do is check whether our data is normally distributed. So we're going to go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, we're going to go to Explore, and we're going to put lactate threshold and the ventilatory threshold over into our dependent list. We're going to click on Options, we're going to go to Statistics. We can see we've got Descriptives ticked, so that's okay. Click Continue. We're going to have both Statistics and Plots. If we go to Options, go to Plots, we want to click Normality Plots with Tests. I click Continue, I click OK. So here you can see the SPSS output. So we get our descriptive statistics, we've got our mean, we've got our standard deviation, and you can see it for both of them. You can also see the kurtosis and the skewness. But what I'm wanting to look at this point is our test of normality. Because we've got less than 50 participants, we would look at the Shapiro-Wilk test of normality. So as you can see here, the p-value is greater than 0.05. So we can say our data is normally distributed. So this means that we can do a paired t-test on our data to see if there's any differences between the two conditions. So to do the paired t-test, I'm going to go to Analyze, Compare Means, Paired Samples t-test, and then I'm going to click the lactate threshold and the ventilatory threshold over to the right hand side. So it was already there, so I've done it twice by mistake, but you can see, it's gone over to the right hand side. We're just going to click OK, and now we should get our SPSS output for the paired t-test. So you can see in this box here, we've got paired sample statistics here, so it gives us a mean, a standard deviation. We've got the paired samples correlation, which we're not looking at, but this is the table that we're wanting to know. So we're looking at the pair of the lactate threshold with the ventilatory threshold. Is there a significant difference? And the biggest thing that we're wanting to look at is the significance value here. You can see that it's greater than 0.05, so we would say that there's no difference in the oxygen consumption between the lactate threshold and the ventilatory threshold. So that's how we would do a t-test. Okay, so we've completed the paired samples t-test in SPSS. So now what would we do if we were writing this up in a lab report or into a project? So we'd go into Word, we make sure that we've got the figure, and remember with figures we put the titles beneath it. So you can see that I've written here figure 1, mean plus or minus standard deviation, oxygen consumption at lactate and ventilatory threshold. And then in terms of the written description, what I've written is, as can be seen in figure 1, there's no difference in oxygen consumption between lactate threshold, and I've given the mean and standard deviation, and ventilatory threshold with the mean and standard deviation. Then I've given the t-test results. And here, that what's important is the t, then we've got open brackets, and we've got the degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom is the number of participants minus 1. So in this case, it's 10 minus 1, which is 9. And then we've got the t-value, so it equals t-value, which is 0.60. And then we've got the p, which is the p-value, which is p equals 0.57. And that is everything that you would need to write for this in with regards to your paired t-test in a lab report or in a project. Hopefully that helps.